morning. Waiting for people to join in. So good morning or good afternoon, whenever you're watching. Waiting, just giving this a second for people to join in. All right. So this month, what we've been doing on the Friday talks is exploring the Gospel of Mark with the help of a particular book. The book is called Render Unto God. It's by James Newton Poling. Economic Vulnerability, Family Violence, Pastoral Theology. We've only looked at, only one chapter of the book actually to this point, but what we have been kind of setting up with the help of Poling and Ched Meyer's argument is looking at Mark as the way that it shows the political and economic activity of Jesus' ministry, and taking a look at the context of real people, real place, Mark's community in Galilee, poor farming community that is under pressure from Rome, but also from a temple system that both of which are demanding their goods, their slave labor, demanding fees for the purity and debt system of redistribution. And so really laying the foundation of what the economic situation looked like for the community. Long story short, there's enough demands, both religious and political and economic, that people in vulnerable work are continually exposed to things that require them to then pay fees, and that keep them into an extreme level of poverty, such that even if they did own land, often they weren't able to maintain it, or it was taken in the tribute systems, and you end up working for either slave labor for Rome or kind of a tenant system for the elites in Jerusalem, which are the high priests, and you have a rise of large wealthy land ownership that continues to abuse folks through non-essential wages. So we've done all of that. Now, Mark's community is dealing with a number of ways to kind of respond to this oppression. We talked about that last week. Could be collaboration, as the elite Jewish priests do in Jerusalem. They participate with Rome. They receive tribute through the temple system. They receive the fees through the purity system. They are supported by a system that is oppressing their Jewish neighbors, especially those out in the peasantry areas of Galilee. There were renewal movements with the Pharisees and the Essenes, which basically just meant we're going to take the system that's at hand and just make it work for us. So the money that is going to the high priest, we're just going to have it come to us. And then there were representations of military overthrow of Rome. The Zealots still not wanting to overthrow the temple system, but just take it over and then have it work for them. So still not addressing the root of the kind of economic hardship for the peasants. And then the presentation is Mark's gospel as a version of non-alignment and restoration. So saying that the system itself, any system that was meant to help people but ultimately is just furthering their oppression, keeping their poverty going, isn't good enough. And so the whole thing needs to go and be reconstructed in a different manner. So that's the argument for what the for what the Gospel of Mark presents. Well, how do you do that? And so the Mark story of Jesus is kind of the example of okay, if you're looking at an economically oppressive and violent system, then what are the ways that Jesus confronts this? So so today we're going to briefly talk about like a little bit of the Mark story. How is it that Jesus is trying to confront violence and economic oppression? And then we might get to a little bit of like what's the economic vision that Jesus presents. That's not exactly a fair way to put it. That's the way that polling puts it in the book. Like, what's the economic alternative vision? But you got to remember that we're not talking about capitalist system. We're not talking about communism. We're not talking about Marxism. Those are all modern concepts. We're talking about first century. The temple system that's in place represents both the economic system and the political system and the religious and social system. Those things are together. They're not in any way separate. They're all together. So anytime you are confronting the economics, you are confronting the politics. Anytime you are confronting the politics, you are confronting the economics. And anytime you're confronting either of those, you're confronting the religious institutions. It's not somehow separate in any way. So broad strokes of the kind of Jesus message in Mark and the strategies for bringing transformation. And the way that Poling and Mayer kind of talk about it is in these kind of broad strokes. First is calling and converting disciples who would organize the community and develop actions, especially symbolic actions that bring about change. Second is empowering the poor, that is Jesus' own community. Remember, this isn't middle class Jesus who kind of goes 9 to 5, running around with trying to help poor people and then going home to the manse. It's just Jesus' community. He is in the poor community. There's no choice to be there. It is just his community, and that's so critical to remember. This isn't abstract for Jesus or Mark's community. This is their community. For us, it's a little more, especially if you're more centrally located in the empire and enjoying the advantages, like I do, like many of us do at Foundry. For us, it's like we got to make choices every day. For Jesus, it's life, and so that's a big difference for us to keep in mind here. So empowering the poor, healing and releasing the poor from the bonds of purity and debt systems, which keep them trapped in cycles of extreme poverty. Finally, confronting the religious and political leaders, challenging purity rules, and engaging in debates about the meaning of the law. And Jesus, from the start, is plotted against. Ultimately, the elites of the temple system, those who are enjoying collaboration with Rome, they are successful in killing Jesus. But for the readers of Mark, Mark is successful in his writing such that he presents Jesus as someone to be sympathized with, and through his crucifixion, Mark shows the elite leaders of his society to be corrupt, and so that's a takeaway. Now, those are kind of the three really broad themes of what's happening. For Poling and Mayer, they walk us through an outline of the Jesus story, especially the public side of the ministry. And I don't know if Jackie's going to be able to get like the table into the comment section for you to look at. So at a minimum, we'll be able to put like, here's the theme, here's the verses. So the way that they talk about it, walking it through, is that there are parallel stories for the demonstration of Jesus's ministry on the Jewish side of things and on the Gentile side of things. And so in the story, we jump off almost immediately with kind of some of the first miracles, and one of the first ones that is talked about is the inaugural exorcism on the Jewish side and on the Gentile side. So on the Jewish side is chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. On the Gentile side is chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. each of these is like a demonic possession, and they're shown to be like nobody's been able to do anything about it. They've tried to chain him down, they've tried to stick him in the cave. It's all of this stuff, and it's basically the demonstration. The stuff that you've been trying isn't working, and the stuff that you have been trying has actually made the situation worse. This is kind of the recurring theme throughout, especially with the healings and the stories around possessions. For us, you might think, for Poling anyway, he goes into it because he's really talking about pastoral theology and how we care for people who are vulnerable. Um, he goes on to kind of make comparisons in terms of like, all right, how is it that we actually address things like mental illness in our own time? So so he talks a lot about that, and it is important to remember like, okay, well, what are the systems that you're doing to try and deal with things, and are they making it worse? And that's kind of that recurring idea for that first century Mark community. If you were dealing with a mental illness, you're probably calling it possession, and then you're trying to force the person into confinement, into whatever, and trying to make them pay for things so that they can become clean, and none of that is working, and it makes it much worse. So there's one for the Jewish side, one for the Gentile side. I know I'm going fast, but we only have limited time. Popular ministry is kind of the next theme, and that's chapter 1, 29 through 39 on the Jewish side, 60, chapter 6, 54 through 56 on the Gentile side. Popular ministry, like just doing things with a larger population, is what those stories end up being about. Symbolic healings. Well, let me jump back to popular ministry. Literally, a lot of those verses are like, and many were healed. Those are the types of things that are being talked about there. Like, it's just Jesus is going around and like doing the thing all over the place and for both sides. Coming back. Symbolic healings is the next one. Chapter 5, 21 through 43 on the Jewish side. Chapter 7, 24 through 37 on the Gentile side. These end up being like, there's one in particular in chapter 7 on the Gentile side. It's the healing of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, the lady that is called a dog, and then right after that is the restoring of sight to a blind man. These are big symbolic things. On the Gentile side, it's breaking of barriers. It's across ethnic line, across religious line. And breaking down the barriers that have been keeping apart two poor communities and making sure that they are fighting in the midst of both of them being oppressed, making sure they're fighting to continue to hold up the more oppressive system. And this is Jesus coming in and saying, you know what? These lines that we've drawn in between us, they need to go. And he does that through those symbolic healings. On into the wilderness feelings, and there's two. Of course, we think about the feeding of the masses. There's two of those stories, one for the Jewish side, one for the Gentile side. And if you want to, the organizing community plays around with those stories and says it's the start of community organizing, like, because the way it works is Jesus is like, have the disciples just tell everybody to sit down, get in pairs, and then start sharing what you got. So it's literally just organizing the community such that you go from a place of we're hungry, let's go into town, which would have been the traditional way to do it. Go into town and we'll purchase all the supplies, and all of that is pointing to we don't have enough here to care for ourselves in the way that we need to, and so we need to go and participate in a system that is hurting us overall. And Jesus sits everybody down and says, nope, look at each other. Look at what you have already and share it. And at the end of each of those stories, there's more than enough and there's leftover. And so and it happens on both of the sides. And so it's the constant theme of yes, and we can do it here, we can do it together, and we can do it in a broader space. We don't have to continue to participate in systems of violence to get these things done. Finally, and this has been ironic or hilarious for me as I read it, but like the last theme that kind of Mayer and Poling talk about is non-comprehension of the loaves. which is never helpful when I'm reading it because I'm like, what are you talking about? Which just perpetuates this thing of like not understanding. But the non-comprehension of the loaves, there's two stories. One in chapter 651, right after the wilderness story, and then chapter 8, 14 through 21, also right after the wilderness feeding. And it gets back to this space of like, um, are you paying attention and still participating in bad systems? That is the yeast of the uh, of the Pharisees and of the priests. Are you still participating in those things which get all up in our area and corrupt what we're doing? Or are you paying attention to what is available? That's the best I can get it down. Um, but there's a lot of there's a lot of symbology to be understood there, and of course, thinking of as you get further down the line into the crucifixion and Jesus being offered as the bread, as the loaf, and eating from there and not eating from the systems that are still corrupt. So, so what? That's like the broad outline of the public ministry side, and I know I did that very fast, but there's a lot here. So, what comes next, though? That's all symbolic action. That's all healing. That's all ways of confronting what's at hand. It's all kind of doing the cultural analysis around like what is the system that we're pushing back against. Well, after that comes what is the community supposed to do? Okay, if we can see it and we see what isn't good about it, then what are we supposed to even be trying to do about it? And this enters in more the growing of the disciples and the teaching and the discipling of the community itself. Um, and I've got about 3 minutes, so we'll start on this, but we're not going to be able to finish. So I'll start on this. One of the big things that comes up as we move from like the public broad ministry of Jesus is then how it moves back inside to the kind of family of the disciples and how they're being taught um, to reimagine what's possible. And the imagination piece becomes one of the main barriers, and that's demonstrated throughout the narrative in the disciples kind of being slow to get it. And it is especially demonstrated in the space where you get to the questions from the disciples about like who's gonna be greatest, who's gonna be greatest among us, and what that story points to is your minds are still fixated on a system that you think operates by dominating the other side. You're still fixated on a system that is successful in the way that it pushes the other side down. That is the powerful side that's hurting you right now, pushing them down and then having domination over them through whatever means is necessary. And this was the constant pushback that Jesus gives. That was like the zealot um, mode. We'll win this militarily. And that was a lot of the expectation that the disciples and the public have, especially at the entrance to Jerusalem. All right, we're coming into Jerusalem. We got this big crowd. We're on the donkey. There's the waving, shouts of Hosanna. And then we're going to do this thing. And we're going to be violent. And we're going to overthrow the temple. And that's when the unexpected thing or the disappointing thing happens where Jesus says, no, we subvert, and we subvert through nonviolence. And he leads that from the core. And he teaches that in the message in a way that is personal, in a way that is for the family, and in a way that is for the household, and in a way that demonstrates nonviolent leadership in the community. And I will get into those, but I will have to do it next week because we are at time, and it is a little bit too dense to do today. So, what are you leaving with today? We are in a space where violence and domination is still the currency of leadership and even of renewal movement. And I think the message to remember from Mark is that's not your goal. The goal is a reimagining, that is a freeing of our minds to think of how it can be different. To literally get yourself into a headspace where you can think of new systems, of new ways to share, of new ways to police, of new ways to lead, of new ways to do economics, of new ways to look at what we already have, and rather than using it to leverage over top of someone, figuring out ways to disperse it and share it in such a way that it ends oppression, that it ends violence, that it sustains life, rather than continuing cycles of death. So maybe leave with that. Today, I know a lot of people are going to be out for the march. Some people are already out. I hope you'll do that safely and get out there and get your mask on. If you haven't done the census, if your neighbors haven't done the census, do the census. Got to get that done. Today, there will be a little water table by Foundry, literally just for some water. It's extremely hot, so if you happen to be out and about and you need a drink, you can swing by. We have yard signs. The In Solidarity yard signs, the Black Lives Matter yard signs. You can grab one of those, take them home. Tonight's the last ringing of the bells for the summer. That'll happen this evening. But I hope you'll be out and about and demonstrating and making making a stand for peace, making a stand for how we imagine life can be different. And next week we'll talk about a little bit more of how the disciples were actually taught to do that at every level of life. Prayers for all of us, prayers for peace, prayers for rest, and let us make the thing happen. Make the thing happen. Walk with Christ, walk with the Spirit, go where they lead, and go and do likewise. Bye, friends. We will see you later on.